See, today is my first day back on the streets. Can y'all hear that?
Yeah.
But I got a secret to tell because this was a rude awakening for me. See all them nights that I sat up on that bunk and dreamed about this day. Now reality and hope just don't look the same. So instantly I'm drained. See, this is the first time in my life that I've ever felt ashamed. See, I have to go live back at my mother's house, and including her, everybody in there, they want me out. See, they say I'm just another mouth to feed, and there isn't no place in there for me to sleep. And then the streets start to whisper to me, Lamont, come back. You ain't gotta live like that. The streets ain't changed. You still know this game. See, the streets keep calling me by my first name. And all my buddies I thought was gonna take care of me when I came home, now they moving in that cell I just left, though they dead and gone. So I'm out here alone trying to fend for myself. And every time I look in your direction, you lower your eyes or your head. So from you, I can't get no help. And then the streets start to whisper to me, Lamont, come back. You ain't gotta live like that. The streets ain't changed. You still know this game. See, the streets keep calling me by my first name. And the other day I go see my parole officer, and she's telling me that I got to do A, B, and C, or she gonna guarantee me they gonna take me off the streets. And all I wanna do is say, miss, just help me. But it seemed that she got her guards up, like I'm here to make her job rough. So I keep my mouth closed and promise myself that I'ma do as I'm told. But then the streets start to whisper to me, Lamont, come back. You ain't gotta live like that. The streets ain't changed. You still know this game. See, the streets keep calling me by my first name. And just the other day, I was going into my mother's building, and these 14 and 22-year-old children asking me who I'm going to see. Instantly, I had one of those flashbacks of snatching that gun from my waistline and putting something on his mind, but I was glad I was able to decline. And I just said, I'm going to see my peeps. And his bottom lip dropped, and he nodded his head like he was giving permission to me. And then the street started to scream at me, Lamont, come back. You definitely ain't gotta live like that. The streets ain't changed. You still know this game. See, the streets keep calling me by my first name. And just last night, I was sitting on the edge of the bed trying to hold my brain inside my head. See, I'm starting to get weak. So the streets starting to get more visible to me. And then I remember this plan that I created when I was in jail, that I told myself, if I follow it from A to Z, it's gonna better my chances when I get free. So I said, I'll try this plan again. A got me a job, T got my own side. C, every time I touch the stage, I make sure that I leave it high. But I just hope tonight, when I lay down to go to sleep, that I'm not too weak, because the streets gonna be whispering to me, Lamont, come back. You ain't gotta live like that. The streets ain't changed, it's still know my name. And the sad part about it, y'all, is that the streets may never forget my name. Imagine laying on the top bunk with the cover over your head. Imagine you can hear the steps of a correctional officer slowly walking down the tier. Imagine. Count time. Imagine when they call count time That means mail call. Imagine. Imagine a correctional officer stopping at the cell door and he looks in. Imagine. Imagine that he looks at the guy on the bottom bunk. Jenkins, 1. Imagine. Imagine that he points to the guy on the top bunk. Washington, pull the cover off your head. Washington, 2. Imagine. Imagine the correctional officer signals Washington to come to the door. Imagine. Imagine that he gives him 3 pieces of mail, 2 letters and 1 card. Imagine. Imagine. Imagine what Jenkins must feel. Imagine. Imagine that this is the 398 days straight that he hasn't received a message from his family. Imagine. Imagine that most of his mail is returned to sender. Imagine. Imagine that Washington opened the card and he reads it. Imagine. Imagine that he hands the card towards Jenkins. He says, Jenkins, read this. My mother be lunching. Imagine. Imagine the humiliation that Jenkins must feel. Imagine. Imagine that if he accepts this card that he's admitting that no one loves him. Imagine. Imagine that he knows that Washington is only doing this to show him that he cares. Imagine. Imagine that he takes the card and he reads it. Imagine. Imagine as he hands the card back, he lays back down and pulls the cover over his head as he flips through the pages of his mind, trying to find out what has he done for his loved ones to abandon him. Imagine. Imagine that he gets off the bunk and he goes and stands by the cell door. Imagine. Imagine that when the cell door opened, Jenkins along with 1,500 inmates run onto the tier. Imagine. Imagine that he grabs a phone. Imagine. Imagine that he dials a number. Imagine. Imagine that the operator says, collect calls cannot be accepted by this number. Imagine. Imagine that this is the woman that gave him life. Imagine. Imagine that he doesn't know that his mother doesn't accept the phone call because she can no longer afford the high prices. Imagine. Imagine that he doesn't know that his mother doesn't accept the call because she no longer loves him anymore. Imagine. Imagine one of the most important days in a prisoner's life, Family Day. This is the day when families pour into the institutions and spend hours and hours with their loved ones. Imagine. Imagine that Jenkins doesn't leave the cell. Imagine. Imagine that he knows that there is no one out there that loves him. Imagine. Imagine that Jenkins is about to go up for parole and he is in contact with nobody in his family. Imagine. Imagine that his cell buddy Washington allows him to use his mother's address in order to try to regain his freedom. Imagine. Imagine that when he goes on parole, the parole board tells me he has 1 more year to go. Imagine 1 more year of having his letters being returned to sender. Imagine 1 more year of having his visits, no visits at all. Imagine 1 more year of having his phone calls being rejected. Imagine. Imagine that he has 24 hours to go before he's scheduled to be released. Imagine homelessness, unemployment, no support system. Imagine. Imagine. Imagine that Jenkins has 1 more hour to go before he's scheduled to be released. Imagine. Imagine that he decides to clean his cell that he has lived in for the last 7 years 1 more time. Imagine. Imagine as he cleans his cell, he takes a sheet and ties one end around his neck. Imagine. Imagine that he walks into the T and ties the other end around the guardrail. Imagine. Imagine that he walks back and takes the deepest breath that his body has ever held. Imagine. Imagine that he breaks off to the fastest run that his feet have ever carried. Imagine. Imagine that he leaps into the air, the tips of his toes touching the top of the railing before dangling 4 stories down. Imagine. Imagine what 1 letter, 1 card, or 1 visit could have done to change this person's life. Imagine.